What's the funniest way a rude person got what was coming to them? My neighbor Lorraine spent 3 years treating my house like a store where nothing had a price tag. It started small, a cup of sugar she never replaced, our ladder for an entire summer. Then it was, can I just hop on your Wi-Fi until mine gets set up? And her Wi-Fi somehow never got set up, not in 3 years. Every single time I said yes, because I did not want to be the difficult one on the street, and every single time she read that yes as permission to come back for something bigger. That is how it works with people like her. You are not being kind, you are filing a permission slip. And I want to be clear about how ordinary all of it looked from the outside. Lorraine waved at everybody. She remembered your kid's name and your surgery and your work schedule. She brought a card over when the retired couple's brother passed. If you had asked anyone on that block to describe her before this fall, every single one of them would have said nice, friendly, maybe a little much. Nobody would have said she was running anything. That is exactly why it worked as long as it did. So this past Saturday, she finally outdid herself, and she did it to my kid. My daughter Mia is 10. Every morning she takes our 2 dogs out to the front yard, and she brings the little bag with her, and she cleans up after them without anybody having to remind her. She has done it since she was 8. That morning she barely got down the porch steps before Lorraine came cutting across the grass and planted herself right in front of her. She said, "Hey sweetie, does your family have Disney Plus? There's a show I missed last night and someone told me it's on there. Can you just give me your login real quick?" My 10-year-old, standing in wet grass holding a bag of dog waste, told her that was not hers to give out. Lorraine did not stop. She said, "Oh, come on, your mom wouldn't even notice, it's just a password." Mia said no again. Then Lorraine's voice dropped into that flat register adults use on kids they think they can push, and she said, "I'm being really nice about this. I'm only going to ask one more time." My daughter said no for the 3rd time, and a grown woman got angry at a child over a streaming service. She threw her hands up and said, "Unbelievable, this whole family is so stingy," and she spun around to make her big exit. Now, the dogs had already done their business in the grass, and Mia had not gotten to it yet, because Lorraine had cornered her before she could take 2 steps. So when Lorraine spun, she put her foot straight down into the middle of it. Both dogs. She let out a screaming string of curse words at 8 in the morning, hopping on one leg in my front yard in front of my 10-year-old, and she had an audience she did not plan for. The man who walks his dog past our house every morning, the mom across the street loading her kids into the car, the retired couple who sit on their porch with their coffee and see everything. Mia came inside laughing so hard she could not get a full sentence out. That should have been the end of it, a funny story I tell at work. It was actually the beginning. That afternoon, Lorraine knocked on my door with her calm face on and said she thought there had been a misunderstanding with my daughter. I told her there was no misunderstanding. She asked a 10-year-old for our login and got mad when the 10-year-old said no. She said, "Well, when you say it like that, it sounds bad. I only asked because I figured you wouldn't mind. We're neighbors." I told her being neighbors does not make my things her things. She said it's just a password. It costs you nothing. I said then it costs you nothing to buy your own. She switched lanes and said her shoes were ruined. Expensive shoes. And my dogs really should not be doing that where people walk. I told her my dogs go in my own yard where my daughter cleans up after them, which she would have done if Lorraine had not blocked her to demand a password. I could see her lining up the ask for the shoes, so I said the 2 things I had been holding all day. Buy your own subscription, and I am not paying for new shoes. Then I shut the door, politely, and stood at the sink with my hands shaking. That evening I walked the casserole dish back down to the retired couple. I meant to hand it over and leave. I did not make it up the steps before the wife leaned forward and said, "We heard every word this morning." Her husband nodded in his rocking chair and said, "She borrowed our garden hose in April. We have not seen it since." And something opened up. I sat down on the top step, and for the first time in 3 years we talked about Lorraine honestly, not the polite version, the real one. A hose, a set of mixing bowls, a stepladder, batteries, trash bags, always the same script. "I just need it for today. I will bring it right back." Always delivered with a smile like you were her favorite person on earth. They had stopped lending 6 months ago and never told anyone because they thought they were the only ones, and they did not want to look petty. That is when Preston came over from across the street, hands in his pockets, and sat down on the bottom step like he had been waiting years for the invitation. He said, "She told me she would return my lawnmower at the end of June. It is October." Preston is 72. I had watched that man push a manual mower through his own grass all summer, the kind you shove with your arms, and I never once asked why. He had bought it with his own money to replace the powered one Lorraine still had in her garage. He said, "I did not want to cause a fuss." That sentence sat in my chest for a week. I did not want to cause a fuss. That is the whole engine of it right there. Not one of us was afraid of Lorraine. We were afraid of the 2 seconds after you tell somebody no, that little drop in the air where they look at you like you just did something ugly. She had figured out that most people will hand over almost anything to avoid those 2 seconds, and she had been collecting on that for years without ever once raising her voice. We stayed on that porch another half hour, and every minute somebody remembered something else. A phone charger that walked off with the whole cable. A bag of fertilizer she promised to replace and never did. Each one sounded like nothing on its own. That was the trick. Stack them and it stops being nothing. That night the mom across the street texted me. Lorraine had borrowed her infant car seat months ago for a friend's baby shower. One afternoon, right back. Never returned it. The mom spent $90 replacing a car seat for her own child. For a woman who does not have kids. I sat at the dining table reading that text and something clicked. This was not absent-mindedness. It was a route. She rotated houses so nobody felt hit too often. She timed her asks for when your arms were full of groceries or your kid was already buckled in and you just wanted her gone. She framed everything as tiny, just today, just real quick. And she kept us all separate because the whole thing only works if nobody compares notes. So the next morning I started a group text. No speech, one line. If Lorraine asks you for something, you are allowed to say no. Preston wrote back, should have done this years ago. The retired couple sent a thumbs up. The mom across the street wrote, finally. Lorraine had no idea the block had just started talking. She knocked on Preston's door at 9 the next morning. Big friendly grin and asked to borrow his mower because hers was acting up. He looked at her and said, "You mean the mower you borrowed from me 5 months ago? That mower." He told me her face went still like someone had hit pause. She had never needed an answer for that before. She started saying she must have gotten them mixed up, and Preston said, "It is green with a yellow handle and my initials scratched into the side. Bring it back by end of day." By 4 o'clock it was sitting on his porch. 2 days later, she showed up at the mom's door with a $3 bag of store cookies, still twist-tied, and asked whether her husband knew how to fix a garbage disposal. The mom said no, but there's a handyman in the phone book. Lorraine laughed and said it would take him 5 minutes. The mom said, then it should be easy for whoever you hire, and Lorraine picked her cookies up off the step and left without saying goodbye. Then it was our turn again. She came to our door and asked for Bertrand specifically. Sweet voice. Said she had a fence section leaning bad and he was so handy. He did not even pause. He said, I charge $60 an hour. She laughed. That laugh people do to give you a chance to take it back. He did not take it back. He said, I spent 12 years in construction. I do not work for free. She stood there waiting for him to fold, and when he did not, she walked off the porch without a word. What got me about the fence was that it was the second person she had asked for the same favor. She came to me on a Wednesday, and I told her Bertrand was busy. She waited 4 days and went straight to him, on the assumption that a compliment and a big smile would get around whatever I had said. That is not a woman who forgot. That is a woman working a list. I watched her from the front window after each one. After Preston, she went home fast with her head down. After the mom, she stood on the sidewalk a full minute scanning houses like a person checking which stores are still open. After Bertrand, she stood in her own yard with her arms crossed, staring at our house, not moving. Then she went quiet for 2 days. No porch light, no loop around the block. Car never moved. Bertrand thought it was over. I knew better. Lorraine did not take things because she was cheap. She took them because she believed she was owed them, and people built that way do not go quiet when the giving stops. They go loud. Friday, I was washing dishes when her car pulled up loaded with party store bags. All afternoon, she hung streamers and taped a banner across her porch that read, Neighborhood Appreciation Cookout, Saturday at noon. Nobody was invited individually. No texts, no knocks. She hung a sign and expected a crowd. Bertrand looked at the banner and said, she's planning something. I said, so am I. Saturday, she dragged a folding table into the middle of her front yard where both ends of the block could see it, spread a plastic cloth, and laid out chips in bowls, a grocery store cake still in its clear container, and a cooler of soda. She made a poster board sign that said, free food, with a smiley face under it. Of course she did. Free was the only word she fully understood. People drifted over by noon. The retired couple with their mugs. Preston at his own pace. The mom with her 2 kids who went straight for the chips. I took Mia and 1 dog and walked over because I wanted to see what this actually was. For 30 minutes it was almost nice. She was charming, handing out plates, joking about the cake being crooked, doing that thing where she makes you feel like the party exists because you showed up. She was performing the version of herself she needed everyone to buy. Then she picked up a plate of cake and held it like a toast and said, I've been thinking about how neighbors used to look out for each other. Really look out for each other. Not keep score. Not act like lending a cup of sugar is a big deal. On keep score, she looked directly at me and held it, not a glance. She turned back to the group and said, I just think some people have forgotten what community means. Preston shifted in his folding chair. The retired couple had one of those silent married conversations. The mom pulled her kid a little closer. Everybody knew who she meant. Then she reached behind the table and produced a gift basket, the $20 kind wrapped in cellophane with a bow, and carried it across the yard to me with both hands like she was presenting an award, and said she felt like we got off on the wrong foot and she just wanted us to be good again. 15 people watching. I took it because what else do you do? There was a candle, a bottle of lotion, and a card in neat cursive that said, good neighbors share, let's start over. And I understood the whole thing at once. The banner, the food, the speech, the basket. It was one move. She was not apologizing. She was building a room with witnesses in it where the only way out was me smiling and going back to yes. If I refused, I was the bitter neighbor who ruined a nice cookout over a candle. The basket was not a gift. It was a cage, and she was handing it to me in front of everyone hoping I would step in. I almost did. 3 years of habit does not evaporate because you had one good week. And then Mia, standing beside me with the leash in her hand, looked up with that confused face kids get when adults are being strange, tugged my sleeve and said, Mom, isn't that the lady who yelled bad words at me? She was not being cruel. She was 10, and the woman handing her mother a candle was the same woman who had screamed curses in our yard over dog waste, and it did not add up for her. The whole yard turned. The mom across the street put a hand over her mouth. The retired couple set their mugs down. Preston said quietly, she's right, you know. Lorraine's smile did not fade. It dropped like a cut string. She put her hands up and said, that was a misunderstanding, and nobody nodded, nobody helped her, nobody gave her the polite murmur she had been living on for 3 years. I set the basket on the table. I did not need to say anything. Within 20 minutes, she was alone, stacking plates nobody had finished. That night, Bertrand said he thought it was finally over. I told him it was not, and that losing her audience was the worst thing that could have happened to somebody like her, because everything she ever took, she took by being liked, and she had just watched Being Liked stop working in front of 15 people. He asked what she could possibly do next. I said I did not know, only that it would not be cookies. Monday morning, I opened the front door, and my foot came down on a piece of paper folded under the doormat. No envelope, no name. Typed on a computer and printed, like a document. It said our dogs were a health hazard to the neighborhood, that our yard was unsanitary, that children in the area were at risk, and that a formal complaint would be filed with the city if we did not contain our animals and their waste. I read it twice standing there in my pajamas. Then I got to the line that gave her away. It complained about our morning walk routine and said the dogs were being walked at the same time every morning in full view of neighboring children. Exactly one person on this block knew Mia goes out at the same time every morning, because exactly one person had camped in my yard at 8 to shake a 10-year-old down for a password. She typed it so her handwriting could not be matched, which told me she already knew it was something she would need to deny. Bertrand read it over cereal and said, she typed it so she could pretend she didn't write it. I called Alvin, my brother-in-law, because he works in the same building as the city code office and knows the people in it. He read it back to himself and said, unless your dogs are loose or you are leaving waste out for days, there's nothing there. It is your yard. Then he told me the part that mattered. Keep it. Keep the paper. Write the date you found it on the folder. Do not go knock on her door with it. He said if I confronted her, it would turn into a shouting match on a lawn, and she would spend the rest of the year telling people I was the aggressive one. Paper does not shout. Paper just sits there being true. I want to be honest that my first instinct was the exact thing Alvin told me not to do. I wanted to walk down there in my slippers with that letter in my fist. What stopped me was a very boring thought, which is that Lorraine had spent 3 years making sure everything she did was verbal. No texts, no notes, nothing anybody could hold up. She asked in doorways and driveways and at rolled down car windows, where the only record is 2 people remembering it differently later. And here she was, finally, in writing. That afternoon, 2 texts came in within an hour. Preston found one on his porch the same morning. Same plain paper, same typeface, unsigned. His said his overgrown hedges were a fire hazard. Preston spends more hours in that yard than most people spend in their living rooms. Then the mom across the street found hers. Her kids' bicycles were a tripping liability and an obstruction of public walkways. The bikes were on her own porch. 3 letters, 1 morning, 3 households, and every one of them had told Lorraine no in the previous 2 weeks. I walked down to the retired couple and asked if they had gotten one. The wife shook her head and said no, and then paused and said, "Actually, she asked us for eggs yesterday, and I gave them to her." There it was, in one sentence. The people who still said yes got nothing. The people who said no got a threat under the mat. She was not lashing out. She was sorting us into 2 lists. I called Alvin back and asked what happens when somebody files a complaint that is not true. He said if it is filed and comes back unfounded, the filer can be cited themselves. And he said the office notices when several bogus complaints land from one small area on one day, because nobody likes sending inspectors out for nothing. So I got everyone on the group text and told them the same thing. Do not throw the letters away. Keep the paper, photograph it, write down the date and the time you found it. Preston already had his in a drawer. The mom had taken a picture. I put ours in a folder on the counter with the date on the tab, and I mounted a cheap camera over the front door that night. Wide angle, night vision, because my daughter walks out that door every morning and somebody was leaving anonymous threats on the other side of it. Saturday morning, I was making pancakes when the bell rang. A man in a polo shirt with a city badge on his belt and a clipboard in his hand. She had actually filed. He said he had a complaint about unsanitary conditions related to animal waste and needed to walk the front yard. I told him to go ahead. He went slowly, section by section, checked the sidewalk, bent down by the flower bed. Mia had gone out at 7:40, same as every morning, scooped, tied the bag, and dropped it in the can on the side of the house. There was nothing. He clicked his pen and said, "This looks fine, no violation." I knew the yard was clean. I had known it the whole time. Hearing a man with a city badge say it out loud on my own grass still landed somewhere I was not expecting. Then I asked him to wait, went inside, and came back with the copy of the letter. He read it standing on my front walk, and when he reached the line about our morning walk routine, his eyebrows went up. He said they take false and retaliatory complaints seriously, and if it is a pattern, they look at the source. He asked to keep the copy. I said yes. He did not leave the block. He pulled over in front of Preston's house. Preston texted the group one word, "Ready." 20 minutes later, no violation on the hedges, and the inspector took his letter too. Then the mom, same thing, no violation, and hers went on the clipboard. 3 complaints, 3 inspections, 3 clean results, all on the record, all in one report, with 3 matching unsigned letters attached. Everything Lorraine had spent 3 years doing had been deniable because it was verbal, and it was small, and it happened 1 door at a time. The second she typed it out and printed it and put it under 3 doormats on the same morning, it stopped being her word against ours and started being a document with a date on it. 6 households eventually pulled their stories into one thread with dates on most of them, and it stopped reading like neighborhood gossip and started reading like a ledger. The hose in April, the mower in June, the car seat in the spring, the charger, the fertilizer. The eggs handed over the day before the letters went out. Not one line of it was worth calling anybody about on its own. All of it together, sitting under 3 identical unsigned pages, was the only thing anyone needed to see. Alvin called that afternoon and said his contact had mentioned the office got a cluster of complaints from one street that all came back clean, and that when that happens, the filing party hears about it in writing. I stood at the counter with the phone in my hand, thinking about a 10-year-old in wet grass telling a grown woman no 3 times without blinking, and how it took the rest of us 2 weeks to catch up to where she already was. The next week, there was a city envelope in Lorraine's mailbox, the kind with the seal in the corner. I did not read her mail, and I never found out exactly what it said. I only know what stopped. She stopped knocking. She stopped walking her evening loop. She stopped bringing cookies to doors she wanted something behind. She stopped asking the retired couple for eggs. She stopped entirely, and the block filled back up with people standing in their driveways talking to each other. The mom across the street let her kids leave their bikes on the actual sidewalk again. The retired couple started sitting out later into the evening. The family 2 doors down finally changed their Wi-Fi password, which they told me they had wanted to do for 2 years and had never been able to think of a polite reason for. Preston came over at dusk one evening and sat on our porch step while Mia scratched both dogs behind the ears, and he told her she had been the bravest person on the street. She said, "I was just holding dog poop," and he laughed until he had to take his glasses off. Her porch light stayed dark. Across the street, the green mower sat in Preston's garage, initials up, right where he had scratched them.